After Britain's treachery against the Bourbon dynasty, the Crown Prince of Ferdinand, under the guise of simply stationing his troops, executed a coup in the crown lands of Sardinia and Sicily, proclaiming himself the rightful Bourbon Emperor. Ferdinand VII would declare repentance for his participation in the Mexican heresy, beg the Pope for forgiveness, and approach Napoleon with an offer. Crown me King of Spain, and my loyal soldiers and armadas will join you in your war against the British. Napoleon would gain greatly from this arrangement. Despite Napoleon's newest ambition of uniting all of Europe under his control, he would accept this deal, so long as Napoleon's recently born son be married to Ferdinand's daughter, Isabel, and the Kingdom of Spain to be considered an integral part of the French Empire. Ferdinand would accept these stipulations, swearing fealty to Napoleon. The Spanish Armada that Ferdinand had controlled soon linked up with the French Navy as another siege of Gibraltar would ensue. Will the British Navy be able to continue their support of the Gibraltar garrison, or would the unexpected defection of the Spanish Armada allow for Napoleon to seize the gateway to the Mediterranean? Will the Russo-French alliance persist, or will Russia disobey the continental blockade? How will the former Spanish colonies react to these developments? All of these questions and more will be answered in Episode 5 of Project Bourbon, an alternate Napoleonic timeline. Thanks for watching my video. If you haven't, I recommend watching all the previous episodes before continuing. The link to the playlist will be just above in the top right. After Napoleon had repulsed the British invasions of Iberia, Gibraltar was once again ready for a siege. However, with the defection of the Renegade king, Napoleon had increased the naval capabilities of his nation to a level that was far beyond the British ever could have anticipated. In our history, Admiral Nelson orchestrated a brilliant victory of the British Navy against the Spanish and French Navy that decimated the Spanish Armada and secured Britain's naval supremacy for the rest of the Napoleonic Wars. Many alternate histories that have Napoleon winning have Nelson's Battle of Trafalgar being a British loss. The battle was truly that critical to the war effort. It goes to show logically that if Nelson was engaging the French fleet, the sudden introduction of a portion of the Spanish Armada would not have prevented this victory. However, there are several divergences that are going to significantly impact the outcome of this conflict. Nelson and the Bourbonic navies would have been working together ever since the Bourbons had been exiled. For this reason, the Spanish Navy would learn greatly from British naval tradition and doctrine, improving their naval capability and giving themselves an intimate knowledge of the British Navy and their operations. The British Navy would have been split apart, with far more hostile nations to consider. At the very least, the defection of the Renegade King's armadas would impact their level of organization. And for the Spanish Armada that had remained on the side of the British, their loyalties will be tested once they see their brothers taking the side of Napoleon. Once they had the slightest idea that the heir to the Bourbon Empire defected to Napoleon, the Bourbon exiled commanders on the British side may suddenly turn on them. And that's exactly what happened. All these factors would cause Nelson's Trafalgar to be a disaster for the British. Naval supremacy was now no longer solely in the hands of the British, and the Napoleonic faction would master the Mediterranean, as Gibraltar falls to Napoleon's forces. This alternate Battle of Trafalgar would cause havoc in London as they prepared for the worst, a Napoleonic invasion of Britain. However, Napoleon would not be able to push this advantage, for reasons that will be explained in a later chapter. For now, Napoleon would turn his eyes to the Mediterranean and attempt to solidify his position there. After Russia's partition of Prussia with France, the Russian-French alliance seemed permanent. However, after Napoleon had announced the continental blockade, the Russians had felt that this was unreasonable. British goods were highly sought after by the Russians, as Britain held many lands in India which produced the luxury goods that the Russian elites had coveted. Thus, Russia would not comply with the continental blockade, continuing to trade goods to Britain. Napoleon found the actions of Russia incredibly frustrating. However, the potential for Russia to continue to collaborate could be possible. France had the ability to provide Russia the luxury goods they sought through trade to Brazil. Therefore, if Napoleon were to offer some concessions to Russia, they may yet continue to partake in the continental blockade. In order to solidify Napoleon's grasp on Europe, he would propose to the Russians that they partake in another partition, this time against the Ottoman Empire. Now that the French had removed British influence in the Mediterranean, The potential for another Egyptian campaign was possible. Without the British able to reliably support the Ottoman Empire, and with Russian support, Napoleon's influence in Europe would increase. Russia would comply with the continental blockade, and prospective nations like Hungary would join the Napoleonic order. Hungary had sought to reclaim Greater Hungary by annexing the lands of the Kingdom of Croatia, which used to be a fundamental part of Hungary. Wishing to partake in this partition, Hungary would elect Murat to become their king, and joined the Napoleonic alliance against the Ottomans. After Russia, France, and Hungary began their invasions of the Ottomans, the Egyptians under Muhammad Ali would revolt against the Ottomans. Ali was a very sharp man. Starting as a simple noble from Albania, he would eventually become ruler of Egypt through several complicated schemes. This leader of Egypt would also understand Napoleon's ambitions against the British. Therefore, he would offer a chance to collaborate with Napoleon's designs against British India in exchange for Egypt's independence. Instead of attempting to make a protectorate of Egypt like before, Napoleon would accept, adding yet another nation seeking to destroy the Ottomans. But that would not be all, as Persia would invade the Ottomans, seeking to claim land for themselves, as the Ottomans lay stranded and without allies. With nearly all their neighbors at war with them, there was no chance for the Ottomans to resist. Thus, the Ottomans would significantly shrink in size. Russia had gained a satellite state, Dacia, formed from Moldavia and Wallachia. France had gained influence in Algeria and Tunis, but allowed Tripolitania to remain independent as a buffer state between themselves and the new ally of Egypt. Persia had gained lands in Iraq, which triggered the Iraqi Mamluks to revolt against the Ottomans for their cowardice. Such civil unrest would encourage the attacking powers to continue. Russia herself was extremely interested in marching down south and liberating more Orthodox lands, potentially even reviving the Eastern Roman Empire, like Catherine the Great had ambitions for. However, France could not continue their support of the partition, and walked away from the partition satisfied with the security of northern Africa. Disappointed with the French withdrawal, but fearful of a French counterattack, the Russians would resume their embargo of Britain. Without Russian timber to repair and create more ships, the Royal Navy was unable to recover from the Battle of Trafalgar, allowing Napoleon to fulfill the promise that he had made to the renegade king following his submission to Napoleon. Ferdinand relinquished his claim to the Kingdom of France and accepted his place as a vassal of Napoleon under the condition that Napoleon would ensure that the former viceroyalties of Spain be conquered and granted back to the Kingdom of Spain. Now that the Russian problem had been solved, and the Mediterranean was secure from the British Navy, there is now no reason to delay the fulfillment of this promise. Napoleon would send several of his marshals and troops to Brazil, where they would begin campaigns against the viceroyalties, starting with La Plata and Peru. After the French troops had reached Brazil, the Napoleonic invasion of South America would begin. But before we discuss the exact strategy of these troops, we need to catch up with these viceroyalties, as we have not explored the ramifications of their independence. La Plata would have remained mostly stable after their independence. Cisplatina, being directly controlled by Portugal, would restrict their ability to truly prosper, but Peru would have been having much more trouble. In our history, Peru was the most loyal viceroyalty of South America, being the last to defect from Spain following the Latin American Wars for Independence. This is mostly because of their fear of a native uprising if they were to declare independence. Due to the divergences of this scenario, Peru revolts anyway, but due to improper preparation, Peru's society had begun to deteriorate without its colonial overlord. This period of social unrest would give the natives of Peru an opportunity to declare independence. This situation had left Peru isolated, without any allies to support their suppression of the native insurrection. This gave Napoleon an incredible opportunity prior to his American invasion. He would, on behalf of Ferdinand VII, offer assistance with the suppression of the native insurrection for their subjugation to the Spanish king, and therefore the French Empire. They would accept, and French troops would begin moving in to suppress the native insurrections. This action of French troops beyond Europe shocked the world, and before the La Platans could react, the French had invaded La Plata through Brazil, resulting in their quick capitulation. The only remaining outpost of resistance to the Napoleonic alliance in South America would be Chile, who had used their expansive mountainous terrain to their defensive advantage. The sudden expansion of the Napoleonic Empire into South America had triggered the rest of the Americas to respond, as Napoleon's American campaign began. The Republic of New Spain, only recently beginning to stabilize after the nobility's coup, had suddenly begun to shatter. With news of Napoleon's invasion of La Plata and Peru, many feared that New Spain would be next. Soldiers would be stationed in New Granada, anticipating a Napoleonic invasion through Brazil. However, the treachery of the nobility would be New Spain's greatest adversary. Napoleon had extended an offer to the nobility of New Spain, who had recently begun chafing with the liberals who had entrenched themselves in their parliament. They could join the Napoleonic Empire, and despite Napoleon's initial vows of anti-slavery, would make an exception for these nobles. The nobility had facilitated the end of the monarchy in an attempt to preserve their slaves, much like Brazil in our history. So there were many nobles who would defect to the Napoleonic Empire, causing a civil war in New Spain between Ferdinand loyalists and the Republican center. The Napoleonic faction was hoping to be supported by the Napoleonic Navy. However, Britain would support the Republican forces as a lesser evil than the Napoleonic Empire's slow subjugation of the world. The soldiers stationed in New Granada would eventually lose ground to the Napoleonic forces, retreating to Panama, but allowing for the Napoleonic Navy to station themselves in the Caribbean Ocean, threatening the dominion of the Caribbean and the Republic of New Spain. With the Napoleonic seizure of New Granada, America began preparing for war. The United States of America had not resolved its internal conflicts following the end of the Second American Bourbon War. They had gained land, but a minimal amount, and a majority of the land that they had gained was not suitable for slavery, which left the slave states fearing the destruction of the institution following the settlement of the Great Lakes. They would even half-heartedly subjugate Tecumseh's Confederacy in attempts to slow down the inevitable march of freedom. These slave states would begin to see Napoleon as the solution to the American way of life. The American president would declare their support for the Napoleonic Empire and invade the Federal Republic of New Spain. As America marched against New Spain, the Second Battle of New Orleans would ensue. The potential for America to seize the city was incredibly likely. However, a legend would rise in this battle. The relative of the Bourbon dynasty, Louis Philippe, would lead an army defending the city that shared the same name of his dynasty and miraculously pushed back the forces of Jackson. This overture would be auspicious for the American conflict, as the humiliating defeat of American forces in New Orleans would trigger the Federalist secession movement to gain significant traction. The British would pounce on the opportunity, declaring their support for the New England succession. Tecumseh's Confederacy would gain a second wind as they began liberating more land from the colonists, and a second Canadian Revolution would take place, causing disaster for the United States of America. But would it be enough to stop the inevitable march of Napoleon's armies? Would America manage to defeat their numerous foes? Or would Napoleon's desire for empire lead to the United States becoming yet another pawn? Will the Republic of New Spain hold on? Or would they fall to reaction once again? All of these questions and more will be answered in Episode 6 of Project Bourbon, as the War of the Sixth Coalition begins. And that was Episode 5. We are reaching the end. There's not much to go. I really hope that you enjoy the next couple of episodes, because this is what it's all been leading towards. If you want to be there first when the episode comes out, please subscribe. And if you like this video, give it a like. Shout out to Ballin Aura University and Enzo Rafael Souza Silva for being channel members. Thank you so much for your support. If you want to have your name shouted out at the end of my video, please consider supporting the channel by getting a membership. Stay safe, look both ways when you cross the street, and hope you have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Please subscribe. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.